and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 584, and today's date is February 5th, 2015, and the title of this episode is Central Bankers' Secret They Don't Want You to Know. We don't need them, and we never did. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we understand that Greece and the ECB, they are having many discussions, and of course they're going absolutely nowhere at this point. Greece is continually making new proposals, but of course the central bankers don't want to hear anything besides you're going to pay the debt off, because again, debt is their product. And we can see right now the ECB is sending up the first flare. They're saying, hey, listen, we're going to be blocking funding to Greece via debt collateral. Basically, what this means simply is that since Greek banks are now unable to pledge Greek bonds as collateral and fund themselves, and liquidity is about to evaporate, the ECB has effectively just given a green light for Greek bank runs. And people have been going to the banks. They've been taking their money out because they're very nervous. We have to remember what Goldman Sachs said. If you do not elect the correct party, we will have a bank holiday. We will use bail-ins to get our money. We will take it from the people. But Greece is not backing down. They are standing there and saying, listen, we're going to keep the promises we made when we went through the election process. We're going to spur the economy. We're going to stop austerity. And we're going to do everything we possibly can to get the people back to work, to get these people making a living so they can have an income coming in. And the Syriza party is out there saying that they don't have any obstacles in leaving the Eurozone. If this is something they need to do, then they will do this. We always have the opportunity at looking at different areas to help us out, and I believe he's talking about Russia. And we also have to understand is that the Turkish pipeline is going to run right through Greece. I mean, this is going to help their economy. Of course, this is not going to be going live until December of 2016, but this will help their economy. Russia has also said, listen, if you drop and leave the Eurozone, we will lift the food ban. And you can start exporting the food to Russia. So Russia is out there saying, listen, we will help your economy if you need it. And we can see how things are going and how things are turning out, that they might actually go ahead and look and decide to go that route. And if the ECB decides that, you know what, maybe we should write off some of the debt, they will never say it is a write-off of debt. They will create something else to make it look like, no, they've come to this agreement and there is no debt write-off. Because you have to remember, Spain, Italy, France, many of the Eurozone countries are looking at this situation and saying, listen, if they're going to write off the debt, so are we. Now, Italy, as we know, the Eurozone is completely falling apart. These countries are in so much debt. Unemployment is skyrocketing. Plus, they have the food ban from Russia because the sanctions were placed on Russia, and then Russia retaliated with food bans. But we can see Italy has lost about 1.25 billion euros in exports to Russia. That's about 1.43 billion in dollars. And their exports have dropped by 11.6%. This is not helping each one of these countries. I mean, we've seen pictures in France where the food was just piling up because they didn't know what to do with it. And of course, Russia is looking at different countries for them to import the food that they stop from Europe. And again, this is not helping the situation. It's actually making it worse. But we can see the central bankers, they're trapped. They know their system is falling apart. They know their debt has grown so large, and there's no one able to work and produce tax revenue to keep this debt sustained. It just can't happen anymore. All these countries in the Eurozone are having problems, even here in the United States and Canada and Australia, all in the same boat. As the debt continually grows and the revenue base declines, it cannot be sustained. This is why all these countries are going out looking for more revenue, especially the United States. They've been creating all these different laws to find more income. And there is nothing left. The American people are tapped out. They're getting laid off left and right. I mean, if we look at Australia, what do we see? Retail sales grew just by 0.2% in December as consumers held back from the big Christmas splurge. Spending in department stores fell nearly by 1%. Data confirmed that retail sales lost momentum at the end of 2014, and lower petrol prices and a falling Australian dollar have done little to boost sales. Well, we're seeing this all around the world. These lower fuel prices doing absolutely nothing. Actually, they're hurting a lot of businesses. A lot of people are getting laid off because of this. It's not doing what they thought it was going to do. And of course, there's many different agendas with this suppression of the oil prices. There's one, they thought they were going to spur the economy and people are just going to come out and spend like crazy because they were saving money on fuel. Didn't happen. Holiday season, a bust. They're using it to put pressure on Russia to destroy their economy, so they'll back off with support on Assad so the war can continue in that area. It's not working. Everything they're doing is not working, and they are trapped. And when you trap a creature like this, they come out with their claws, and they're getting ready to push war as hard as they possibly can, and they will not stop. Here in the United States, we see that layoffs surged by 17.6% year on year. Challenger announced this morning that layoffs in January soared by 17.6% year over year, with planned job cuts at the highest level in almost 2 years. The number of planned layoffs by U.S. employers rose to a nearly 2-year high in January as the energy industry slashed jobs in the face of falling oil prices, according to the report by Challenger, Gray, and Christmas. Employers plan to let go about 53,000 jobs in January, up 63% from the 32,000 layoffs announced the previous month. Total job reductions last month were the highest since February of 2013. And we can see more and more companies are laying off. Wisconsin State cutting 400 positions. Weatherford International, 5,000 positions. Siemens, they're going to cut 7,000 jobs in a reorganization. And we see the factory output is continually dropping. Why? The Baltic Dry Index declining. It has gone down to 564 points. It's continually falling. And we can see that this is taking its toll on many different areas. Privately owned shipping company Copenship has filed for bankruptcy in Copenhagen after losses in the dry bulk market, with the CEO exclaiming, "We have reached a point where there is not more to do. We suspect, given the crash in shipping fees, that this is the first of many." And we can see everything is starting to fall apart. It's a cascading effect, a domino effect. And it's spreading across the world. And again, countries are taking precautions. A lot of countries are recalling their gold. They want their gold back. They realize the U.S. dollar is collapsing. They don't want to hold on to it anymore. It's toxic. And a lot of countries are making deals with China, bilateral trade agreements, to hold yuan renminbi in reserves. Because we realize and we understand that China and Russia, India, have been purchasing gold, lots of it, because eventually what they're going to most likely do is back their currency with a real asset, and that asset is going to be gold. Belgium right now is planning to retrieve 200 metric tons of gold deposited in the United Kingdom storage in 1930. They want it back. They're going to send a ship with 50 soldiers and a helicopter to get the gold. The gold is worth about $7 billion. They're not going to give you the date and time because of security reasons. But they want their gold back. And we see a lot of countries are doing this. And it's getting harder and harder to get the gold. Because why? UK, US, and many nations don't have the gold anymore. They were depending on paper and ink. And China, Russia realized, no, we need to have gold. We need to have a currency that is backed by something. So people look at it and they feel secure about it. Right now, the dollar is backed by nothing. And we can see right now, throughout Africa, in Europe, in Asia, everyone is protecting themselves by bringing in the yuan and renminbi in their reserves. Because they realize once the dollar collapses, they don't want to be out there alone. I mean, look what the Swiss did. They depegged from the euro. And right after that, they set up a currency swap facility for the yuan and renminbi. UK's done it. Australia, New Zealand, Canada. United States, no. Very interesting. Now remember back when a drone was flown into the White House lawn and it crashed there and Obama was out there. We need drone laws, and we knew this was a complete setup. Most of the things they do today is an absolute complete setup to convince us that we need additional laws. And basically what they like to do is to, if you look at the situation, they like to take things away from us. And when I say us, I'm talking about we the people. And people ask me, why would the government make up things? Why would they use propaganda? What would be the purpose of this? Well, you have to remember. They passed an amendment, 114, back in 2012, which was attached to the NDAA, which allows them to use propaganda against the American people. And this is the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act of 2012, Section 501, which allows them to use propaganda on the people of the United States. And if you noticed, this is what they've been doing. If you notice, these stories that come out of the corporate media have no backing in truth. They're lies. It's propaganda. And they do this because they want to remove the rights of the people. They want to take things away from you and make it feel like, yes, they're doing it to keep you safe because you don't need it. So right now they're trying to push laws where they're outlawing drones for the everyday person. The police will have it. DHS will have it. But not the people. Think about what they've tried to been taking away and see if this makes sense here. They don't want you to have body armor. That will be illegal for everybody. They don't want you to have weapons. They want a law where it says basically if they can get rid of them, they would just get rid of all of them. But right now they're trying to push a law where you can only have 10 rounds in a magazine. And they're trying to ban assault rifles. Think about what they're doing. And now they don't want you to have drones with cameras on them flying around. The people just can't have that. Why in the world would they want to get rid of all these different things? Because they continually tell us that there's terrorism, that they could be just running around with guns, and you need to be afraid. Now, everyone thinks that I'm out there scaring everyone and telling everyone that there's terrorism and things like that. No, actually, the government is telling you that. I'm telling you, no, they're the ones who are creating it. And the reason why they're doing this, and again, it's a complete show. It's all propaganda. It's to keep you in fear. It's to remove and violate your rights. This is their whole purpose, because they realize once this collapse comes, there's going to be rioting. People are not going to be able to handle this mentally. They're not prepared for this. Most of the people have been drinking the Kool-Aid, and they're still on the Kool-Aid. And they will not understand what's going on, and they know this. This is why Spain has been training their police force for civil disobedience. France, more troops on the streets. Belgium, more troops on the street. Australia, Canada. Europe has a European police force that can be dispatched to any country that will need them. The United States right now, doing the same exact thing. We've discussed this before. We know why they're doing it. They're trying to convince everyone with a poll about drones that 64% of the respondents say they would not want their neighbor to own a drone. Really? So a toy helicopter, which is considered a drone, you mind if your neighbor has it? Well, I don't. And we know these polls are fixed to make people think in a certain way. And this poll says they rather the police have the drones and the people not. So you can see what they're trying to do here. Now, we understand that they're trying to take weapons away from the people. And Gabby Giffords, the gun control group, they're out there spewing statistics. And this is coming out of Breitbart, and the NRA is countering their argument. Gabby Giffords' gun control group, Americans for Responsible Solutions, claims that there are more than 30,000 firearm-related deaths, plus more than 30,000 car accident deaths among young people each year. However, the NRA, ILA, points to the Center of Disease Control and Prevention, and they're using those numbers from 2013. And we see ages from 0 to 19. There was about 3,753 people from accidental deaths. Accidental firearm-related deaths were about 124. Even if all the deaths are included rather than accidental, you only come up with 3,776, and from firearm-related, about 2,400. So in other words, no matter how you look at it, they're just making these statistical numbers up. Just like the government is doing, they're using propaganda to convince you and to keep you in line and controlled. They tell us the GDP numbers. They tell us the unemployment numbers. They tell us Russia is invading Ukraine. That the Islamic State is involved in Libya, involved in Yemen, and in Iraq and Syria, and we have to send troops. But really what's happening in these countries? The people are rising up. And they knew this, so they had to create some type of terrorist group to convince you of a reason to go into these countries. And this is exactly what they've done. Just like they created Al-Qaeda. They use propaganda. It's a big theatrical stage, convincing you to think the way they are and to keep you in fear and to control you. This is what they're doing. Meanwhile, out in the world, what they're doing is regime change. Killing people. I mean, we see the Jordanian pilot. He was on fire, and I continually look at this video, and it's so professionally done. It feels like I'm in Hollywood. And there's cuts and splices and different angles because they didn't really want you to see certain things. And the men there are in uniform with a black patch which is covered up. Everything is way too perfect. It's a perfect agenda of pushing their agenda to have Jordan, to have Japan all brought in and have them go full force into the war in Syria. You can see it. This is what is done. And all of this again is propaganda. And while they're out there, and the president out there saying, oh, this is terrible, the man is burning, what about all the drone strikes in Yemen, in Pakistan, when they went to hit a terrorist in an apartment building and they destroyed a family where their limbs were blown off, they were burnt. They didn't mention anything about that, how terrible that was. Think about how many people they've killed in that way. So all of this is completely propaganda to pull on your heartstrings, to make you feel like we need to go after the Islamic State. And we can see that they're out in the world using regime change. Yesterday we mentioned Venezuela. And right now the Venezuelan leader said Samper had been provided with proof of the activities of a U.S. diplomatic staff in Venezuela. They are bribing certain officials in Venezuela to overthrow the government. He's saying that U.S. Vice President Joe Biden was behind the plot, saying the U.S. politician told regional leaders that the Venezuelan government would be overthrown. And we know they are in process of doing this. They're in the process of doing this in China, in Russia. They've done it in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and in Africa. Now, does it mean it's going to work? No, it doesn't. And these governments, they realize what's going on. They understand what is happening with all of this. And they're out there telling everyone. And when we look at the information and we question everything they're doing, we start to realize that, yes, this is what the central banking U.S. government is doing right now, because the system is completely falling apart. Now, it looks like Russia is teaming up with North Korea. Russia is going to divert resources blocked by sanctions to North Korea to upgrade its substandard electrical power infrastructure. Now, are they doing this out of the goodness of their heart? No. What does North Korea have that Russia needs? Now, Russia is out there, they make deals with everyone, economic deals, and they barter, just like China's doing to get around sanctions. Iran's been doing it, Venezuela's been doing it, Syria's been doing it, Cuba's been doing it. And we can see right now, they're going to enhance their power grid. And what are they going to get in return? Rare earth minerals needed for high-tech devices and weapon systems. Why would they go to North Korea for this? Well, North Korea is known to have the largest reserves of rare earth minerals. Gee, that's one reason why the United States would love to have regime change in North Korea. Strategic location and capture the natural resources of the country. See how all this is starting to fit together? Now, out in Ukraine, we see their currency now is down by 32% today. It is completely falling apart in Ukraine. And we see that Russia is hoping that they can create some type of peace deal with German and French leaders and have the UN peacekeepers come into the southeastern Ukraine area and have the UN patrol the area to see exactly what's going on. Now, Angela Merkel, she is meeting with the president of France and Russia, and they're trying to talk about how they can resolve the situation. Now, the United States is mulling over if they should bring in lethal weapons, and it looks like Europe is saying, yeah, we're going to hold off on bringing in weapons into this area. Now, we understand whenever the United States government officials go into a country, it's for a certain agenda. Now, John Kerry is in Ukraine right now, and he has said that the Russian aggression is the greatest threat to Ukraine. Poroshenko has called for NATO to supply Kiev with weapons to fight the rebels in the east. Kerry also cited modern rockets and other military hardware that he said crossed the border from Russia into Ukraine. So they're trying to convince everyone that Russia is supplying all these weapons. Of course, the proof is, oh, that's right, nowhere. They have no satellite images, and we know the satellites are right above. They can give us clear, perfect images that are in color, 3D, so we can see the insignias on the weapons. Everything they tell us is not true. Everything they try to convince us of is not true. It's a lie, and they're allowed to do this according to Amendment 114, Section 501. They can use the propaganda on the people, and this is why they've been using it. Now, Ukraine looks like they might be calling up female citizens, ages between 20 and 50, to join the fight. They've also passed a law toughening penalties for soldier disobedience. The Ukraine parliament passed a law on Thursday toughening penalties for soldiers who refuse to follow orders. The document says that many cases of gross violation of discipline are reported in Ukrainian army. The Ukraine parliament passed the law also saying that soldiers who desert can be shot. It's amazing how John Kerry is out there, and now they're coming up with these new laws. Now we realize, of course, our government officials saying they want peace, NATO want peace, everybody wants peace. And they use this and they continually talk about peace. But when we look at their actions, we say, hey, I really don't think you want peace. The NATO response force in Europe is going to increase to 30,000 troops from 13,000. They've already created 6 rapid deployment force units to be stationed in Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Romania. So we can see right now that they are planning something to go hot. They know they are. The UK has already announced plans to deploy about 1,000 troops and 4 multi-role Typhoon fighter jets to join the response force in Eastern Europe. Does this sound like peace? Like they're saying, hey, let's back off for a second. Let's talk about this. No. It seems that, they're getting ready to do something. And the United States doesn't pass the Ukraine Freedom Act for peace, which allows them to give aid to Ukraine, to give lethal weapons to Ukraine. You wouldn't pass something like that if you're looking for peace. And we can see they don't want peace. Now, yesterday we talked about how the oil suppression is being done by the United States and Saudi Arabia to put pressure on Russia to destroy their economy and hopefully remove support from Assad. Well, Moscow came out today and said, you know something? We are not bargaining with Saudi Arabia. They cannot blackmail us. The United States and Saudi Arabia, it's all propaganda. We are not working with them. We're not discussing cutting oil production levels in exchange for Moscow changing its stance on Syria. We are not bargaining with them whatsoever, and never bargained over this matter. Oil is oil, but everything else is another subject, they said. And they're out there saying, listen, no, Assad has our support. Saudi Arabia tried to blackmail Russia once before in giving up their support to Assad. It didn't work. And we can see them suppressing the oil prices. It's destroying other countries. The United States, Canada, Australia. We're all feeling it. And eventually what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to say, okay, enough's enough. We're going to have to let this oil price go back up. And this is why OPEC was out there saying, we're going to have to let this go, and we predict in the future that oil prices will go back up. And everything they've done has not worked. Spurring economic growth in each one of these countries didn't work. Actually, the opposite effect happened. And it's getting worse. Them having a regime change in Ukraine didn't work. Them changing the governments in the Middle East didn't work. The people are rising up. They're losing control. Basically, the central bankers, the U.S. government, everything they've been trying to do has not been working. They only have one thing left, and that is to cover up this entire collapse with an event which will lead to war. And this is their plan. They tried propping it up. It's not working. We can see out in Damascus and Syria that mortar attacks hit the Russian embassy. And we can see they're trying to push their agenda in this area. Now, the U.S. military has moved search and rescue assets to North Iraq as part of a constant rebalancing depending on the evolving airstrike-only mission. U.S. allies are now withholding military power in an effort to get Obama to do more in Syria. So where is Obama and what is he doing right now? Well, he's pitching boots on the ground in Iraq. Obama is readying the war powers pitch. The White House is poised to send a formal request to Congress asking for new authorization to use military force against the Islamic State. Obama has repeatedly said he will not send combat troops to Iraq to fight the Islamic State, even as he has increased the number of U.S. military advisors in the country, which is called mission creep. They've already have an air base set up with a division headquarters that can support 30,000 troops. Military assets are in depots in Kuwait. Israel is getting ready to push a major offensive to help the situation. They've been bombing inside Syria. Of course, they're the Air Force of the Islamic State. And so is the United States. And so is the other nations, because they're really not fighting the Islamic State. This whole thing is a gigantic movie set to convince you the Islamic State is a threat. The people of each and every one of these countries are rising up. And they're using the Islamic State to go into Syria. And of course, the Islamic State always seems to maneuver out of the way when they bomb inside Syria. And this is why the territory has tripled in size. They're fooling the American people, the world, and trying to convince them that we are under threat, which we are not. Actually, we are under threat. From who? The central bankers. That's who we are under threat from. Period. Now it looks like we have another cyber attack. And this was against the second largest health insurer, Anthem. They said the hackers hit into a database with personal information of about 80 million of its customers. And we know this is coming from the NSA. We know they are doing this on purpose. Why? Because they want to pass cyber legislation. Haven't you noticed since they wanted to pass this legislation and it was going nowhere, all of a sudden the attacks hit last year when the legislation was introduced and it was in the Senate? And they were trying to push it. And of course, Obama was out there saying, hey, I'm going to veto any type of legislation like CISPA or CISA. But he created all the executive actions that actually support it. Now he's created a duplicate of those bills and wants to pass it. So again, he lied. And we can see they are using these cyber attacks to push their agenda. This is how they do it. They're convincing Congress, they're convincing everyone that yes, we need this. But basically what's going to happen, it's going to give them more control of the internet. And this is exactly what they want. Remember the 10 steps to closing a society, and one of them is information control. And this is exactly what they're trying to do. Now, out in Canada, many people don't realize what's going on there. Now, those people who are living in Canada, you might not have heard this at all, or maybe you have if you're looking at some other alternative media or new media. But if you were just listening to the corporate media, you've heard nothing of this. Comer versus the Canadian government and the Bank of Canada. On January 20th, 2012, the Committee for Monetary and Economic Reforms, which is Comer, decided that they were going to sue and bring a lawsuit against the Bank of Canada, the Minister of Finance, the Attorney General of Canada, the Minister of National Revenue, and the Queen. And their case is that the Bank of Canada Act, which stipulates the Minister of Finance and the Government of Canada are required to request, and the Bank of Canada is statutorily required to make interest-free loans for the purpose of human capital expenditures, infrastructure and expenditures, and federal, provincial, and municipal expenditures. Basically, they cannot have a central bank which issues the government loans with interest. And they decided to sue basically the central banking system. Now I want to give a little historical background on this. Prior to 1938, Canada did not have a public bank. As a result, the government had to borrow money for government expenditures from private banks at interest. However, on the eve of the Great Depression, 1929, The interest on the government debt had reached an alarming 1/3 of government expenditure. As a result, a royal commission was set up in 1933 to study the setting up of a Canadian public central bank to issue interest-free money to the government for budgetary and public expenditure. The Bank of Canada was constitutionally created as a public bank in 1938 and mandated with exclusive power and right to issue and loan the federal and provincial and municipal governments interest-free money for the budgetary support, public infrastructure, development, and human capital expenditure, such as education, health, and other social programs. Typically, however, in 1974, the Bank of Canada was again unconstitutionally and thus illegally privatized and taken over by foreign banks, which started printing fiat money and loaning it to the government at interest and dictating monetary, fiscal, budgetary, and economic policy in Canada. As a direct result, the Canadian public debt has since skyrocketed from $24 billion in 1974 to over $600 billion in 2014. So this is what happened in Canada. It's the same thing that pretty much happened in every single country, and especially here in the United States. So Comer decided that they were going to sue. They decided that, wait a minute, we cannot have a central bank that loans out money with interest. This is unconstitutional. The government, who is most likely getting a huge kickback from the private bankers, because this is how it works, and this is how they entice them and blackmail them to do this type of work. And they realize that, wait a minute, something is wrong here. And now they're in a lawsuit. And we can see that the lawsuit is still ongoing. Right now, it's upon review. The judge found that the claim was still far too broad and it was struck in its entirety, but the decision gave the plaintiffs leave to amend their claims to address their failings. No final win or loss has yet happened. Comer can amend its claims and resubmit them to the federal court. Upon doing so, Canada can also file a motion to have these claims dismissed. Essentially, Comer has been given a redo from the start. There does indeed appear to be no mainstream media reporting of this issue whatsoever. And those people in Canada, you might not have heard this whatsoever. But we can see the private Western central banks slither into our societies, and the government officials break the law in allowing this to happen. Now, the thing is, we the people, we don't need the central banking system. We don't need them to loan the government money with interest on it. It's not needed. The government can create their own money. But the central bankers don't want people to know about this. Now, here in the United States, we understand that we have a central banking system, which is the Federal Reserve, which loans the money to the government and needs the money to be repaid by the tax revenue. So the people are stuck repaying the money to the Federal Reserve because they loan this money with interest on it. But when we look at the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, the Congress shall have power to coin money, regulate the value thereof of foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. The government can create the money without interest. Now, of course, this was all put into place back in 1913. And we've most likely heard the stories of what happened on Jekyll Island. But what came out of this is the 16th Amendment. And a lot of people are saying this was never ratified. Our founding fathers had rejected income taxes or any other direct taxes unless they were apportioned to each state according to population. When income tax was enacted in 1893, the Supreme Court found it unconstitutional. In connection with the two Pollock cases reviewed in 1895, the court declared that the act violated Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. So right now, the tax system we have set up is completely unconstitutional. On July 12, 1909, the resolution proposing the 16th Amendment was passed by the 61st Congress and was submitted to the state legislature. Support for the income tax was the strongest in the western and southern states, and opposition was the strongest in the northeastern states. Supporters of the income tax believed that it would be much better method of gathering revenue than tariffs, which were the primary source of revenue at the time. So the bankers at that time believed this would be better to tax the people, but this is completely unconstitutional. Between 1909 and 1913, several conditions favored passage of the 16th Amendment. Inflation was high, and many blamed federal tariffs for the rising prices. So you can see already the government, the central bankers, were maneuvering and pushing the people with fear that inflation is here and we have to blame the tariffs, and this way you need to be taxed. On February 25, 1913, Secretary of State Philander Knox proclaimed that the amendment had been ratified by 3/4 of the states and so had become part of the Constitution. The Revenue Act of 1930 was enacted shortly thereafter. Everything was put into place for the central bankers, which is completely unconstitutional. According to the United States Government Printing Office, the following states ratified the amendment: Alabama, Kentucky, South Carolina, Mississippi, Oklahoma, Maryland, Georgia, Texas, Ohio, Idaho, Oregon, Montana, Indiana, Nevada, South Dakota, and many others. The ones that didn't ratify it were Connecticut, Rhode Island, Utah, Virginia, Florida, Pennsylvania. But when we look at the situation and we understand how the ratification process works, we find out that, wait a minute, something is wrong. The 16th Amendment was not ratified. And we can see, and if you examine it carefully, you would find that a sufficient number of the states never actually really ratified the amendments. U.S. District Court Judge James C. Fox in 2003 said this. What the IRS website and the government in general refuse to recognize is that the 16th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States was never ratified by a majority of the states. Only 2 or less states properly ratified the proposed amendment. In February 1913, Secretary of State Knox falsely declared the 16th Amendment ratified, and the government that has been unlawfully demanding taxes ever since. The 16th Amendment allegedly entitled the government to collect uneven taxes. The U.S. Constitution does not preclude taxation. It dictates that the tax must be uniform for everyone under Article 1, Section 2. The 16th Amendment is claimed by the federal government in the federal territory of Washington, D.C. to authorize their private collection company, the IRS, to collect income tax. However, if the 16th Amendment was not properly ratified, the IRS has no legal authority to collect tax. The same applies to local, county, state tax collectors, who are also bound by the U.S. Constitution after an exhaustive year-long search of legislation records in 48 sovereign states conducted by Bill Benson. Alaska and Hawaii were not admitted into the Union until 1913, so the only record of the 16th Amendment ever having been confirmed was a fraudulent proclamation made by the Secretary of State, Philander Knox, on February 25, 1913, wherein he simply declared it to be in effect, but never stated that it was lawfully ratified. Even if the 16th Amendment were properly ratified, according to Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution, it has always been unconstitutional for the U.S. federal government to directly tax we the people in their property, wages, salaries, or earnings. U.S. Supreme Court judges repeatedly rejected any claims that the 16th Amendment changed the constitutional limits on direct taxes. Bruce-Haber v. Union Pacific Railroad the Supreme Court ruled that the 16th Amendment created no new power of taxation, and that it did not change the constitutional limitations which forbid any direct taxation of individuals. This and other similar cases have never been overturned. An argument is often made by judges attempting to ignore the fact of the failure to ratify the 16th. Is that the precedents under common law now exist because the IRS has been mugging the public for so long, and this somehow legalizes the IRS and the local county tax collector. However, the U.S. Constitution is higher law than precedents of common law, which in itself represents the will of the people and not the will of the government. Bill Benson's exhaustive investigation of the history of the 16th Amendment revealed the following defects. Record of the failed ratification of the 16th Amendment as recorded by the Secretary of State has been documented. And we can see right now that this is completely against the Constitution. Now we can see Canada is fighting this. The people here in the United States, we the people, need to come together and finally stop this. Now, is this the right time to do all of this? To say enough is enough, to rise up? Are people awake right now to do something like this? I don't know for sure, because most of the people are still asleep. We started the first step by talking about it, by understanding what's going on. A lot of people have woken up. The next step was to prepare yourself for what is coming, by protecting your wealth with gold and silver, by having food on hand when the collapse comes, because those people who are prepared, those people who understand what's going on, those are the people that will make change when this system comes down. These are the people that will have to go out and convince everyone and show them that no, it's the government, it's the central bank. We do not need them. We never did. And all of this does not benefit the people. There will be a time, but first, you need to prepare yourself. We need to wake more people up. We need to make sure that we are ready, that we can spread the word. We need to take this one step at a time, and we've been doing it. And eventually, when they want us to go to war for them, this is the time to say enough is enough. We won't need thousands. We won't need 10,000s of people or hundreds of thousands of people. We will need millions at this time marching on Washington. Because when you have millions upon millions, guess what? The government will have a very tough time controlling us. And this is what we are going to need to do. Listen, everyone. Thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.